This episode is sponsored by Linode. Do you need a Linux server for your latest creation? Then check them out. They provide native SSD storage, 200 gigabit per second network connections, Intel E5 processors, and top-of-the-line hardware to run your servers on. It deploys Linux in seconds from a Linode cloud, and you can choose your Linux distribution and node location right from the manager. They have locations in Asia, North America, and Europe, and a sweet set of tools to make it easy to manage it. If the web interface isn't your thing, they also have an API and a command line. They also provide two-factor authentication, IPv6, DNS manager, plumbing, scaling, and everything else you would want. So get the most out of your Linux node by checking them out at linode.com or devchat.tv/linode. Hello and welcome to episode 83 of React Native Radio. I'm your host, Nader David. Today, our special guest is Spencer Carli. Welcome back to the show, Spencer.
Hey, thanks for having me again.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for coming on. I don't remember what we spoke about last time, but if you haven't heard of Spencer, he does a lot of tutorials and blog posts, and he even has some online courses and things like that you can kind of check out and purchase and kind of learn different things about React Native. But today we're really going to be focusing on navigation in React Native. But before we kind of get going, do you want to kind of just update everyone with kind of what you're doing right now, what you're working on?
Yeah, sure thing. So I've got a company called Handlebar Labs where, like you said, I basically do online digital training for React Native is where my focus is. I just started writing some tutorials online in my last position. And then, I've always had a passion for teaching and found that intersection and, put together Handlebar Labs, which is handlebarlabs.com, and started putting together different courses. We've got some free ones, some paid ones, all kinds of stuff from, very basics of React Native to actually everything that goes into shipping an app into production.
Okay, cool. Well, that's awesome. Good to hear that you're kind of continuing down that path. I think I do a lot of training as well, and I really enjoy it. But one of the things I don't do is a lot of digital training. So that seems like to be your focus, and that's definitely a valuable, a valuable asset for the React Native community and things like that.
Yeah. Being kind of in the Midwest and living in Michigan, Ohio, and Tennessee now, it's not the coast where it's not necessarily as easy to go to these live trainings because there's not quite as many people. But, as I say that, there's actually November happening here in Nashville. So I guess I'm kind of contradicting myself there, but I love digital online training, so I just try to contribute to that because that's how I've really grown my skill set in various aspects of life.
So are you going to November?
No, I actually just realized it was going on when I was browsing Twitter right before this, so I'm not too good at those scheduling things and actually keeping up to date on those. Yeah,
I was noticing too all the tweets today about November. I went about 2 years ago, and it was really, really great. Hopefully I'll go back one day.
Yeah.
Well, I guess if you want to kick this conversation off about navigation in React Native, can you kind of give everyone kind of an overall general view of like what it looks like right now? Because things change so fast in React Native, and especially with navigation. I know we've had a show about navigation about a year and a half ago. And since that show, I believe we were talking about even navigation experimental, which is completely deprecated now. So for people that are listening, like, what does it look like? So if I wanted to create a new app, like, what are my options right now? And kind of, where should we kind of begin, I guess, this conversation? That might be a good place to start, I guess.
Yeah. So I guess first off, I should mention, like, there's a ton of really excellent packages out there that people have put a lot of time, effort, and energy into. But typically, like, for anyone I'm training or anyone I'm consulting with, the two options I kind of break it down to, and this is just personal preference. Like, I wrote a blog post about this recently, just kind of like breaking down the entire navigation options that are out there. But my personal preference, like, I'm going to break it down into React navigation, which if you look through the React Native docs, that's mostly what you'll see. And React navigation is a JavaScript-based navigation solution. Kind of the the successor to navigation experimental you mentioned. And then on the other hand, there's also React Native navigation, which I think is also mentioned in the React Native docs. But the difference with React Native navigation is it's actually using native bindings behind the scenes. So on iOS, you're actually using an iOS navigator. On Android, you're doing the same thing. Whereas with React navigation, on the JavaScript side, it's just kind of emulating those different interactions versus actually tapping into the real thing. And each one's got their pros, each one's got their cons to actually use.
So you've been working with React Navigation lately, right? Like as a contributor to the project?
Yeah. So over the last few months, I just joined a few other people to actually just start closing some issues, answering questions, and then merging some PRs. And as I'm starting to actually learn the code base, hopefully contributing and not breaking things, but I tend to break things more than I tend to fix them. So I'm a little bit cautious on that hand.
Yeah, totally. So like, what is it looking like right now? I know for a while there wasn't a lot going on with React Navigation. It was kind of something I was concerned about, and I was hoping that either, I would have the time to kind of jump in and help contribute, or someone would kind of take control. And it seems like you all have done a pretty good job of it. But like, what has changed, I guess, over the last 6 to 8 months in React Navigation, and kind of what is the future looking like?
Yeah, so over the last few months, what's really happened is basically a few of us who are actually using React Navigation, we reached out to a few of the initial contributors of the project. And like, these are people you see all over React Native. They're people working on Expo, working on the core of React Native. And basically they were like just overwhelmed. Like there's so much going on, and like, they've got to focus on what their jobs actually are, and what they're getting paid to do. So React Navigation had to go a bit on the back burner, and it was like that for a few months. But there were a few people who I think a fair number of us just happened to reach out around the same time, and we all just started joining the project, starting to get a bit more familiar and just strategizing between each other to try to figure out, how do we close issues? How do we take care of these really, really core issues? And, honestly, selfishly, like taking care of the issues we're seeing in our company apps, our clients' apps, and really solving those. And then now what we're really starting to do is push the project forward for new things. Like when the iPhone 10 came out, dealing with the iPhone 10's new screen, and then just taking care of various different bugs and, improving documentation, just making React Navigation easier to use, more flexible, and just basically easier to pick up and understand and actually use in your apps.
So I kind of am on the same lines as far as like the two libraries I'm kind of most fond of right now. And one of them is React Navigation. The other one is React Native Navigation. But like what, I don't know, I guess like if you were just to have to choose one or the other, like what would you pick most of the time? And I guess why would you kind of choose one over the other? I know you mentioned that React Navigation is kind of more of a JavaScript implementation, whereas React Native Navigation is a native implementation. Can you kind of talk about like why someone would choose one over the other? And then in a second, I also want to talk about the future of each project as far as kind of like version 2 and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and this is just purely my opinion, but my big consideration when choosing a navigator is based off of the environment that I'm using. And typically the environment I use now is either Expo or it's Create React Native app. And because of that choice, because of all the benefits that brings, I'm limited on the navigator I can use, because if you're using Expo or Create React Native app, they're taking care of the iOS and the Android directory, all of the native stuff. So you don't have to. But as a result of that, you're not able to actually tap into the native things that are necessary to use something like React Native Navigation. Because when you're using React Native Navigation, you need to actually link the package and actually modify the iOS and the Android project to actually tell React Native we want to use this different pattern versus the default. And then you've also got to just basically change the way you're using or starting your application. Whereas with React navigation, everything's just a component. So you've got a stack navigator. When you've got a stack of screens you want to show someone, you're just rendering the stack component, and the stack navigator will actually go ahead and render those screens when that screen is active. So that's my big thing. Basically, I always go to React navigation just because of, well, I shouldn't say just because of, but because of my environment that I'm actually using. And then the other hand, and I have to mention that like I'm not really super familiar with React Native navigation, how they're like moving the project forward. But something that put me off just a little bit was this V1 versus V2 branch. And then I heard something about a rewrite of the project in V2. And honestly, when I was really evaluating these two navigators before diving into it, I didn't have the time to really dive into each project and see the difference. And when evaluating if, one of these projects isn't going to work out of the box for me, which one can I work on? And I was confident that I can figure out JavaScript, but when it comes to Java or Objective-C and working with native stuff, I'm not a native developer, so that was really intimidating for me. So that's the reason I always tend to go towards React navigation. But that being said, I do have clients using React Native navigation, and it's working out perfectly well for them.
So is there anything that you can't do in React navigation right now? Are there any huge bugs that people need to know about? I don't remember specifically what the cases were, but I can definitely remember about 4 or 5 months ago running into some pretty hairy bugs in React navigation, and we did overcome them. And I know that there was actually issues and things open for them. And I've actually heard a lot less complaining, I guess you'd say, about React navigation since the new push with you and all the people that are kind of helping the project come along, and a lot of the bug fixes have gone in. But I guess, are there any big things that people should know about when choosing React navigation? Like, are there any things that you can't do or bugs that are kind of big and they should kind of know about?
Honestly, I'm not sure about that. And I guess it would really depend on who you ask, because there's some people who just, think React navigation is the worst library ever put together. But from my experience, like there's nothing that really sticks out that, I really need fixed right now with React navigation. And those are the kind of things we've taken care of over the last few months. For example, like iPhone 10 support, like that's something a lot of people needed, a lot of the core team needed, or the core contributors needed. So like that's taken care of. That's not something we really need to worry about anymore. But if you look through the issues, there are certainly a few issues where, depending on some users' specific use cases on Android, they can run into some performance issues. And like I don't know exactly what those issues are. Like it's one of the issues we're having with the library is there's a lot of kind of edge cases or one-off instances where they're having issues, but it's hard to reproduce that outside of kind of these more complex projects that they're working on. But glaring bugs, I don't like. There's hundreds of bugs currently in the GitHub issues, but are any of one of them for me like so glaring that I won't use this project? Not currently, but there are certainly some features that would be very, very nice to have, but they're kind of not mission critical features for myself or for a few other people who are contributing to the project. So they're kind of features that are, listed in the GitHub issues, but just haven't been implemented yet. That would be nice to have if they were there.
So this is another question, I guess, to kind of follow up with that, considering you're talking about like, the GitHub issues and things like that. Like, what does the process look like for an issue to be filed and then resolved and then merged into like the next version? And like, who controls that? And if someone listening wanted to contribute, like, how would they be able to do that?
Yeah, so one of the core team has done an incredible job. His name's Lorenzo, and basically he's gone through and triaged every GitHub issue. I think today actually we hit the point where like every open issue has been tagged with something. So basically the process that it goes through is we've got a GitHub issue template where when somebody files a bug report or a feature request, like we ask for a few specific details. One of those really important ones specifically for a bug report is, have a repo, be it Snack or just a project we can easily download that demonstrates that issue. If they don't have that, kind of goes into this state where it just needs more info, and we're not going to do anything more with that until there's some sort of reproduction. We can actually figure out how to experience the same thing the person who is filing the issue had. And then from there, what happens is Lorenzo's typically going to tag it based off the component that it affects. So if it's the drawer, if it's the stack navigator, if it's documentation, if it's a tab navigator, whatever it may be, he'll do that. And then he can also, and I don't have a full grasp on this, but just looking at the GitHub issues right now, but basically he'll also tag it as if it's a good first issue. So if it's a relatively basic bug, that would be something that, if you want to contribute, look at that good first issue tag, and then that's something you could contribute there. There's also a help wanted tag. So like maybe one of us just don't know how to do that, which is the reality on quite a few of these bugs. We just don't know how to fix it, or we're looking for people's contribution and discussion. But that's typically the way the issues work. And then on pull request side, basically once a pull request comes in, all of their tests are going to be run. So we're going to make sure flow passes, the few tests we do have pass, and all of that stuff. And then we'll go through, try to actually review that. And if anything needs to be reviewed, we'll let you know. And what happens once a pull request comes in is we're trying to, this is especially with any like features, but we're trying to be really cognizant of how is this feature going to work in the future? Like what are potential use cases in the future? What are potential ways this can break? So something you might see a fair amount on React Navigation's pull requests or issues, and I don't know how this works on other open source projects, but we really try to have a discussion around these different features and these different issues, just for us to better understand it and really to try to figure out what is the best way that we can do this in the future. And I feel like this has been kind of a sticking point between a few people in the community, because we have these conversations around things, but they don't necessarily get merged right away. So that's kind of the point we're at. And that's one, because we're trying to, make the project as stable as possible. And two, honestly, we're just trying to figure out this project still, because basically all of us, or I should say none of us who are like really actively working on the project are any of the core team. So like we're not the ones who actually wrote this code. So basically with each pull request, we're reviewing it, we're testing it, and we're actually trying to learn those different pieces. So I should say, when you have an issue, when you have a pull request, like be a bit patient, like definitely do it. You're going to get responses within, I would say, 2 days at this point. But just, be open for that discussion that is most likely going to ensue, unless it's a very, very basic pull request that you're submitting.
So what version are we on right now with React Navigation, I guess?
That is a good question. Let's see. I think we are on version 21. So yeah, we released version 21 a week ago now. By the time this is published, though, who knows? We might be up to 25, 26. We're trying to release more often with fewer big changes in each one. For example, like version 20 and version 21 were released on the same day. It was a relatively small release, but there were a few breaking changes. And because it was a small release, we were able to take care of those bugs and fix and release the update the same day.
And when you say 21, you're kind of saying version 1.0 beta 21 or something like that.
Yeah. So that's a good point. React Navigation is definitely still in its beta. I mean, where there's still quite a few like important issues that people want to see, and bugs that we want to take care of before we're comfortable saying, this is at version 1.0. So if you look at the releases, you'll see it's v1.0.0-beta 21 at this point. And it's been in this beta since it was released sometime at the beginning of this year.
So React Navigation is one of the few navigation libraries that can also be used on the web. Is that right?
Yes, but something that is important to note is like beyond the reactnavigation.org website, I don't know of any sites that are actually using React Navigation on the web. And then honestly, like everyone who's actively in the core right now, we're all using React Navigation exclusively on native. And though we're accepting, pull requests or contributions in regards to the web, it's not like a top priority for any of us because there's definitely solid solutions out there already for the web.
Right. Yeah, totally. So I guess if someone like pulled down the latest React Navigation and trying to run it on the web, there may be some bugs or something like that, or would it just not work?
It will work because the website's running on the latest version of React Navigation, but there's definitely some missing pieces from the project that, if you're using React Router, you might have honestly, I don't know what the missing pieces are, but there's a few issues there on the project that you would expect to have on the web that don't work on the web currently. But, if you want to see React Navigation in practice on the web, React Native or reactnavigation.org is running on it, so you can see the way that it works.
So I guess let's switch gears. If someone's coming to React Native from React Web, what are just some basic things to keep in mind when you're kind of working with navigation on React Native versus navigation or routing, I guess you'd say, on the web?
Yeah, this is something that honestly I'm still trying to figure out myself. But to me, on the web, things are very, I don't know if linear is the right word, but basically, if you go to, say you're sent someone's Twitter profile, a link on the web, and you go to it, when you press the back button, you don't expect to go back to your Twitter feed on Twitter. So that's one thing. But on mobile, if you get a push notification, you tap that and you go to somebody's Twitter profile. When you press the back button within Twitter, you expect to go back to the feed. So there's these two different paradigms where and I guess this is also just the UI of native, but when you go to a nested piece of information on on mobile, a user's going to expect to have that backfilled information. This is my interpretation of it. Whereas on the web, it's just kind of one and done. Once you go to that Twitter user's profile, you just, you press home or you press feed on Twitter to see your feed. Whereas on mobile, you're going to swipe back or press the back button to actually go to that feed. And that's something that took me a little while to understand, to really kind of figure out the way to make things feel right. And with that, I'm not a native developer. React Native is really my introduction to native development. I've been doing this for a few years now, but that would be one of the core pieces that I've noticed between web and native.
Yeah, I think navigation on React Native or just navigation on mobile in general is just more complex than web. With web, all you need is a URL and you're pretty much good to go. But you don't really have to take a lot of things into consideration, like where you are currently in this state. You can just kind of go where you need to go. But with React Native, you have to kind of understand all this stuff. And then you have to work within the APIs that are given to you. And then you also have to take into consideration things like tab navigation with nested stack navigation, and that all of that might even be nested within a drawer navigator or something like that. Or even
That's a great point. One issue that a lot of people who are picking up React Navigation have is things are nested. So typically, when I'm working on an app, I'll have a stack navigator at the very root to display any modal type screens. And then I'll have a tab navigator in there to do my tab navigation. And each one of my tabs is typically going to have a stack navigator. And when you're working through the app, everything, it makes sense as a user. Once you've got it set up, it makes sense as a user. But as you're setting it up, you're this is a lot of work. Whereas on the web, it's just, define your 10 routes or whatever, and then you just link to it like that.
Right. Yeah. And
that's something
it's also just mind bending at first.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is one thing that I really, really like about React Native navigation is I think they've done that linear approach. It's to me, React Native navigation is, I think, easier potentially to pick up once you get beyond the installation and kind of recognizing the native dependencies. I think it's really nice because basically you register your screens just like you would in React Router or something. And then you can say, I want to push screen X on or screen Y. And at that point, you're just going to basically tell it how you want it to be displayed. Do you want it to be displayed as a modal, or do you want it pushed onto the stack? Like there's pros and cons to that approach, but I think for a lot of us who are coming to React Native from the web, it's a much easier pattern to pick up versus kind of the explicit nesting that React navigation requires.
I guess, are there any new navigation libraries that are coming out that people should kind of be aware of, or are there anything in general that we really haven't talked about that people might want to know about navigation in general?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I don't know of anything. I'm definitely focused on React navigation, but something that in an ideal world, and I don't know how you organize the different pieces to do this, but I would love to eventually see a unified API between, for example, React navigation and React Native navigation. So you can start with React navigation because I do find it a bit easier to get started with. And then if you want to go to the native route, almost how React has different ways you can render it. So you can render React via React DOM on the web, or on native via React Native. Almost doing a similar thing for that with native navigation. So you would have a single API where it can either be rendered via JavaScript if you want, the flexibility that Expo gives you, or the ease of development that Expo gives you, or if you're running into some issues that you think doing your navigation on the native side will handle. You can basically start one way and then easily transition to native navigation. I have no idea how we could do that, but in an ideal world, that's what I would love to see and kind of work towards. But I think for both React navigation and React Native navigation and potential other library navigation solutions, I think all of us need to kind of almost button down what our navigation preferences and needs are, and really make that clear and kind of continue to work towards those visions before we can really start working on these higher level, more complex goals.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's been it'll be 3 years in March of 2018 that React Native has been around. And, that's still fairly new, but I think we're to a point now where it would be nice to have some very, very solid APIs for things like navigation, Mm-hmm. And I think what we've seen happen is just with JavaScript in general, kind of being a reflection, React Native being a reflection, I guess, of JavaScript in general last year, and around, when React Native was becoming popular, dozens of implementations. And I think it was a good thing because everyone kind of got to see all these different ways and ideas of doing things. But I think we should consolidate, like you mentioned, and kind of come together with just a small number and kind of consolidate resources. Everyone kind of work together and kind of just get a few really solid solutions out, or even just one solid solution out. That works in other ecosystems, and it makes a lot of sense, because if you have 10 different solutions being worked on by a bunch of talented people, what if we put all of those talented people together, to put their heads together on one solution? We would, iterate and have solutions come about much faster, and just more stability in general, which would be good for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I know my personal navigation history. Like I started with Navigator iOS back in the day, then I went to Navigator, then X Navigation, then Navigation Experimental, React Native Router Flux, all kinds of different things, just trying out all these different navigation solutions. And I think a lot of people have done a very similar thing. And yeah, like you said, just kind of hopefully we can really start converging on just one pattern. But with that, I think there's an XKCD comic that says, there's 5 opposing standards right now, and that's just kind of ridiculous. We need one common standard for everyone to follow, and then once you do that, like you've got 6 opposing standards because people rarely can agree on one thing. But
right,
like I've got a lot of those are the best comics. But I think like the community is great, and like you said, like React Native is still very new, so like we're all trying to really figure out how does this work? How do you make like a real native app in JavaScript? But then you've got these very, very critical elements. How do you make it, easy to use JavaScript, but then super highly performant, which comes on the native side, and just kind of finding that medium and really figuring out what are the needs, what are the desires, and then the other side of things, and this is something with speaking from my experience with React Navigation, is like, what are the human resources available to actually make that a reality? So hopefully, if we can start converging on 1 or 2 really solid solutions, then maybe we can really put all that human capital into those 2 projects just to really push those things forward so that they're as stable, as solid solutions as they possibly can be.
Well, if someone wants to kind of get started with React Navigation, I'm guessing the website you mentioned earlier, reactnavigation.org, would that be the best place for them to go? And are there any other resources?
Yeah, go to reactnavigation.org, like read through the docs, check out the GitHub issues or the GitHub README. Like if the docs don't cut it, then I think in the README, like there's additional content that you can go ahead and check out. And then, Lorenzo's done an incredible job of actually labeling all those issues. So if you're using React Navigation and you want to kind of contribute back to the project, like go ahead and check out those good first task ones, or just kind of even just, if there's an issue labeled with a question, the answer to that question, go ahead and post that response. Or if you've got thoughts or opinions on how to implement something, like a feature you guys really want to see, or if you've done it in your company somehow, like let us know how you've done it, and just try to like put those ideas there so that we can all try to just kind of pull it together and really try to figure out those solutions. Like I've never contributed to React Native Navigation, but I'm sure like same goes there. Like if someone's gotten a question, like the answer to that, go ahead and answer that. Or if there's a popular issue or any issue, a bug or feature request, and you have an opinion or idea how to actually implement that or how to solve that bug, like go ahead and leave a comment on that issue of how you would go ahead and approach that, because I know I find those really, really helpful, really insightful to just see how like other people go about doing that. Because I know sometimes when I'm working on a problem for a long time, like the best thing that I can possibly do is just like walk away, take a nap or something, or just set it down for the rest of the night, come back to it tomorrow, look at it, or just better yet, just kind of discuss it with someone and then just kind of have that aha moment. So like, even if the comments are small, like they can be really, really helpful in figuring out a bug or a question, or figuring out how to do an implementation.
Do you have any videos? I know you have some blog posts on React Navigation. Do you have any videos or anything like that?
I've got a few videos. I think I've got a getting started one on YouTube, but that one's pretty old. It's actually got an older API, but that's something I'm hoping to put together really soon, as we're starting to really start solidifying things, just a few videos, and then also just improving the documentation and different guides to cover common use cases that people would use React Navigation for.
Awesome. So I think we can go ahead and get to the picks. Do you have any picks tonight?
Yeah, so something that I've been a huge fan of over the last few weeks is Visual Studio App Center by Microsoft for basically continuous deployment, continuous integration type stuff for React Native. I was always really intimidated by setting that type of stuff up, especially for React Native, just because of all the signing and the certificates that go along with a native app. But I was incredibly surprised by how simple it was for Visual Studio App Center, just because it was really like plug and play, less than half a day, and I was able to get continuous deployment set up without a hitch for one of my apps. And yeah, I was just incredibly impressed by that tool.
Awesome. Yeah. +1 for Visual Studio App Center. I set up push notifications recently, and I've been using Code Push and Analytics for a while, and they're all just so easy to set up compared to what we were doing, or compared to really most of the other options out there.
Yeah, and that's one of the things, like Visual Studio App Center, and this is how I got started, was I had that project. I was handling over-the-air updates via Code Push, and it just automatically brought that project in. And, that was a few steps already taken care of for me, which was, it was awesome to see.
So my pick is a blog post by Nicholas. I think his last name is Charpentier. The blog post is on Medium. It's called Arrow Functions and Class Properties Might Not Be As Great As We Think. And it's kind of a good article talking about how to write your class methods in React in general. And I kind of learned a lot from it. Definitely check it out. We'll link to it into the show notes. Also, React Native training. We have a workshop coming up in January in New York. And also we have one in San Francisco in January. And the tickets are on sale now. We're still offering on-site training also. So if you or your company, needs someone to come out to your location, we can do that as well. So check out reactnative.training. And also definitely check out Spencer's handlebarlabs.com. They have a really, really good, good tutorials in general. If you're kind of looking to learn something specific, he has a few specific tutorials there. And overall, I've heard nothing but good things about the tutorials there. So check that out. All right, Spencer. Well, thanks for coming on. We appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join us.
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks so much for having me. It was good talking to you.
Thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll see you next week.